Thank you. I mean, it's super amazing, and it's super cool be here with also with Kain, and thanks for making some time for us. And yeah, I mean, I'm going to sleep.
This is the only time Stani and I get to hang out these days, right? Is on some shows. So it's it's good fun to get a chance.
Yeah, there's like a 1 hour of time to do business together with Kain. So
exactly. Yeah.
You got an hour and a half.
Layer 1 is a podcast and community dedicated to helping you master all things crypto. We'll be bringing you the best interviews with project executives, technical analysis for trading of the most popular cryptocurrencies, and insight into what's actually happening behind the scenes.
As you join us each episode, you're going to hear about tokens, fundraisers, investments, and even crypto conspiracies. But please remember that nothing we say should be considered financial or legal advice.
Come join us on this journey, and welcome to Layer 1.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of Layer 1 podcast. Appreciate all the support that we've been getting. All the lads and all the people that have been supporting us on this journey. We've been growing, appreciate all of that. And, we strive to deliver the top news and kind of the insights into different sectors. And today is a very special day. I'm super excited to have two biggest players in DeFi. And, we're going to obviously talk about that sector in much detail, and they're going to give you their perspective as, they are on the front lines of DeFi and all that good stuff that's growing pretty rapidly. So who do we have? We have Kain from Synthetix, and we have Stani from Aave. Welcome guys on the channel. It is a little bit of a time difference. We talked about it right before we started recording, right? So I appreciate you guys making the time and hopping on our channel to talk about all this fun stuff. Now, just for those people that might be kind of not aware, maybe living under a rock, kind of briefly explain maybe in 30 seconds the kind of like what your platform does and what kind of market sector does it fit. Let's start with you, Kain, and Synthetix.
Cool. Yeah. Thanks for having me. I've been excited for this one. So Synthetix is a derivatives platform on Ethereum. So it allows people to get price exposure to various different assets like Bitcoin, gold, silver, equities, etc. Within the Ethereum platform. So we allow people to essentially trade those assets through the protocol.
Yeah, I'm Stani. I'm the founder of Aave, and yeah, thanks for having me here again. and this is amazing company to be with. And Aave is a money market protocol. So when we have assets, for example, synthetic assets, for example, what Synthetix mints with the protocol, those can be used as a collateral in Aave and borrowed against. And users can deposit stable coins or other assets and earn interest. And yeah, we started 2 years ago actually as a project called ETHLend, and that was the first lending protocol in Ethereum, and rebranded last year to Aave and launched this year January. And so far so good. DeFi has been growing and becoming even more crazier recently.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Thank you for those introductions. And, obviously you guys are so involved in the sector. There's so many things that are happening. It's almost hard to like keep up. I have so many questions in different ways that we can approach this, but I guess let's start kind of peeling this apart by kind of talking about like from the lend perspective, right? Standing from your perspective. How do you guys see the way DeFi is performing right now? It seems like there's a gap that continues to accelerate between the CeFi and DeFi, where DeFi is offering obviously pretty big yields, especially right now. And I remember when I had you on the channel last time, we've talked about specifically how CeFi rates were actually a little bit higher than DeFi rates, but now it looks like the DeFi rates are accelerating and there's that chase for yield that's happening, and CeFi is kind of struggling to catch on. Do you think that will be kind of separated between the two and they'll continue to drift apart, or do you think there'll be a bridge that'll bridge both segments, the DeFi and the CeFi side to kind of work together, or if that's already happening?
Yeah, I mean, kind of related to those yields, it's I mean, definitely DeFi brings some value-added functions and or actually properties that things are transparent and you can see the whole market, and that is something that CeFi doesn't have in terms of like, I mean, when you look at centralized service providers, especially in the cryptocurrency field, that aren't that much regulated, it's more of like a black box on what's happening actually under the hood and how those rates are compiled. But I usually like to approach this question in terms of like what DeFi can't do, what CeFi can in that sense. And I mean, today it's kind of different than it used to be. I mean, trading tokens with good user experience is pretty easy in DeFi. Lending, borrowing, interaction is quite easy. So we don't have this kind of like a user experience bottleneck, at least that high it used to be. And we of course have different kind of scalability issues. But in terms of like kind of like a product-based functionality, I think CeFi is in a moment that they really need to think their DeFi strategy in terms of they're seeing now that the stuff that we're doing here in the DeFi community really starts to take off because of the incentives. And it has always been like this. Like before the liquidity mining, there was the incentives on earning on stable coins and higher yields than, for example, in bank accounts and so forth, that draw a lot of attention and new products were built. But I think now like the CeFi space is looking a bit towards what we're doing and trying to figure out the strategy. Unfortunately, many of the kind of like strategies are a bit bizarre in the sense that I mean, the most common strategy for a CeFi operator is just list as many DeFi tokens into their exchange and figure out that this is like our DeFi strategy. It's pretty much like Kain tweeted about this quite recently that now, I mean, like all the DeFi tokens are getting into exchanges. And for us, guys like me and Kain that had like their project launched 2 years ago, it's not that easy. I mean, like that the attention comes now. So I think in one sense, like you could imagine that maybe their role will become more of like a fiat gateway, but also that's something that can be solved with decentralized technology. I mean, there's a project called Local Cryptos, which used to be called Local Ethereum, which are using smart contracts to convert fiat into cryptos and back and forth. So I think it's a interesting moment for CeFi, and I think if they don't embrace or develop some, I mean, if they don't join the arms race, I'm not sure what's going to be their future. I mean, looks pretty obsolete from this perspective.
Yeah, I think, it's interesting, right? Like you look at things like Nexo and Celsius and stuff, and, they were, I don't want to say gaming, the yields in the past, right? But, they were definitely trying to juice up the yields to get people in, because there's a pretty heavy trade-off, right? Like to convince someone to give their Bitcoin to some, random opaque, place and hope that it's lent out, effectively and safely, and then they're going to get it back, is a bit of an ask in crypto, right? Like you really got to get over some barriers there. So, the yields needed to be like 8% or like 10% or whatever. And I think that, with DeFi and, things like what Stani's about to launch and what a lot of the protocols have launched is this ability to kind of give ownership of the protocol to the people who are participating. Right. And Celsius and Nexo are never going to do that. They're centralized for-profit companies that are not going to start, they couldn't even if they wanted to, but they're certainly not going to, right? Give out, equity in the underlying company to people who use the service, right? So it's, it's an advantage of DeFi and sort of, these open protocols, these DeFi protocols, that you can actually give away ownership for the people who are building them and bootstrapping them early, that I just don't think a traditional company can compete with. There's always trade-offs, but I think that's the key kind of insight that we've realized over the last 6 to 12 months.
Recently we saw that Binance, is basically launching this launch pool, right? So they're going into that farming space head on and looking like they want to capture that market and flourish there. We really kind of haven't seen that much in terms of wrap BTC being used for farming. It was mainly ETH and stable coins, but we saw recently on Binance wrap BTC being listed. And also, we recently saw a blog post from Arthur Hayes, and he was breaking down, and his opinion was that for the big guys that's still holding that BTC, and they're looking to deploy it, let's say, to have that BTC work for them and collecting the interest, they're still worried to kind of deploy that into a decentralized system. While like the centralized system does have kind of certain things, like in terms of they've been making a lot of money, they have kind of a stash there of cash in case things go south, and there's also the reputation that's on the line. So if things go bad, if you're lending that BTC, then in that case, the reputation for that exchange or for that entity will be very important, and they would do everything they can to kind of satisfy the customers in case they were affected negatively by some issues that happen if they lend out their BTC. And his point he's trying to say is that on the DeFi side, where if you do deploy your capital there, then you're kind of subject to the smart contract, which we've seen kind of, there has been issues in the past with certain platforms, especially right now that, we see a lot of platforms that don't get audited at all, and they're locking down ridiculous capital. So what do you guys think about his statement in terms of that the whales that are looking to deploy the BTC, he was saying that they would kind of rather go with the centralized exchanges rather than DeFi because of that perspective where they're sitting on a lot of cash and they're sitting on a reputation. There's a team behind it. They know them. And, if things go wrong, they don't want to be seen bad in crypto because reputation is pretty much everything.
I mean, it's a pretty self-serving argument, let's be honest, right? It was a great article, but, it was a little bit of psyops as well, right? Like, Arthur's a smart guy, and he's like, oh, we definitely don't want to see this Bitcoin, flood into DeFi, right? And I don't even think that that's actually a fair assessment. I think he, on some level doesn't care. But, what's really interesting to me is when you talk to some of the largest players in the market making space, people that are trading on all of these different platforms, they absolutely are aware of the counterparty risk. Like, it is part of their DNA that, these things are highly, very high risk, and the counterparty risk of handing over your Bitcoin to, any entity, right, is very high. And so I think there's an awareness of that across the spectrum of CeFi, right, of all of these exchanges. They know that their largest traders are worried about counterparty risk. They know that they've got risk limits of how much they're willing to allocate, et cetera. And I think, okay, if someone's got 10,000 BTC, right, are they going to sit there and deploy none of it into DeFi? Or are they maybe going to deploy, 500 BTC or 1,000 BTC? And that's what we're seeing. We're seeing people that are just dipping their toes in. They're going to get comfortable. It's going to happen over time, and they're very good at managing risk. They're going to be able to assess the risk of these different platforms and, the different trade-offs between CeFi and DeFi, and they're going to make their decision. And it'll be a market-driven dynamic that plays out to see where do these assets go. My view is that a lot of Bitcoin ends up on, DeFi platforms in Ethereum. I just really strongly believe that will happen. It's hard to see, what it would take to kind of slow down that transition in my mind.
Well, of course, there's technical challenge to first get your BTC into Ethereum, but once you bridge it to a service or like a protocol like REN or even WBTC, it really opens your eyes to the new world. But honestly, like when I look at the BTC folks, because I used to have the opportunity to actually think about like how do I structure the lending activities. I mean, I got first introduced into smart contracts when I found Ethereum, and I basically understood that this immutability is the thing, and it's very fascinating what I can build. But I first look at, after that, I tried to look into the Bitcoin protocol and try to understand like how flexible it is. Can I basically do slightly more complex transactions and have a collateral and so forth? And that wasn't that possible. So it was pretty limited. And I also was checking that, okay, what if I structure this model, like I will use smart contracts just to, and whatever is the underlying blockchain to safeguard the funds, and then I organize it in a centralized way. I mean, even though I was pretty much like really interested in Ethereum, but I was thinking like how I would structure this thing to work in a scale and make it successful. And I decided to take the hardest road, the smart contract road, back in the days where it was super complex. I mean, Ethereum was probably like the second or third, this kind of like substantial financially complex protocol, or DApp, decentralized application. I mean, there was Ether Delta back then, and I think Augur was still on testnet and so forth. So, I mean, the user experience was super complex, and many of the big BTC holders from those era, I mean, they haven't got themselves that much exposed to what's this kind of like a Turing complete machine that runs on blockchain can actually do. And once they dip their toes in, they start to realize that, oh, you could actually do quite a lot of things, and there's an actual financial ecosystem. And when they understand like the idea that you don't give custody of your funds and so forth, and there's the transparency, you will see everything, and complex contracts even, and so forth. Like it really opens eyes to new world. And there's still people who will not get it. So I mean, this is the thing with Bitcoin. Like, I'm not against with the Bitcoin community or anything like that. And if someone will comment on this thread, like, should really understand that it's not the case. I'm trying to say that people are just limiting themselves for no particular reason. But when they try out stuff, they will find out that, okay, there is actually value proposition for using their assets in a way more wider sense. And I think what the BitMEX founder was advocating is that he pretty much saw what's happening, but on the other hand, like, I mean, does he have a decentralized strategy in mind? So
Right.
literally you then kind of like advocate that, well, actually, like, decentralized systems work, and people trust each other, and at the same time, on the other hand, you're building, either you don't have a strategy, or then you're building something in DeFi, and then you kind of, or you don't, and you become obsolete, because this is a technology that will actually serve. It's the future. You can't just say like no to the future. I mean, it's just the only way we can screw this thing up is that people don't care about the risk and deploy contracts pretty much without testing, and people lose a lot of funds, and we get the reputational damage. The same way as Bitcoin gets reputational damage on stuff that is not pretty much even used for. Let's say if you talk about money laundering, which probably doesn't happen, like it's there are a bunch of other ways to do that kind of stuff, and that is something that is associated into Bitcoin. And same way, like in DeFi, could be associated that it's risky because of the hacks and so forth. So I just think that these are the kind of like the reasoning, maybe.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I mean, I agree with everything you guys said. Coming from him and his perspective, obviously he is in that, that centralized side. So he's definitely going to try to push that rhetoric there. So, like, speaking of the smart contracts and audits and things that kind of been happening or not been happening in our industry, because you can see contracts and forks are being deployed constantly. No audit, they make it very clear, no audit, right? And then boom, they have suddenly 400 million locked up, which is like insane, right? And you're talking about, there's a huge risk in case things go south, right? And a lot of people are going to lose money. Then it's going to put that dark cloud over the DeFi space, and especially because people weren't understanding the risks and so on, right? So with that being said, we do have a lot of these contracts that are coming out, and what is the reason why there's no audit being performed? Is it because they're trying to deploy it as quickly as possible to the market to capture the wave, or they just don't really care much, or they're waiting for the community to maybe sponsor an audit later on? We see also things like Nexus Mutual coming out, where you can actually get an insurance on a smart contract that, let's say, if you have your money locked into the pool, and if the smart contracts, basically cause an issue where you lose your funds, Nexus Mutual can insure that, right? So those guys are probably making a bank right now, right? Because there's so many unaudited contracts, and perhaps maybe even the people that are deploying capital into these pools, maybe are hedging with Nexus Mutual in case, like, hey, listen, it's an unaudited contract, but I can get this insurance and I should be okay. What are your thoughts on, like, why do you guys think that we're getting so many forks that are not audited but seem like legit product?
So I think the first thing is there is a bit of a double standard here, right? Like, we're talking about the concern over like a large DeFi loss, setting back DeFi, et cetera. Let's not forget that the history of centralized exchanges is littered with like just absolute catastrophe, right? Like, I don't remember anyone calling for like maybe auditing Tether, right, and trying to like see if they had reserves, right? But like generally, it's just kind of like, who's auditing the code of places like bitfinex and Binance and OKEx. Like, we don't know what the security practices are. It's totally opaque, right? It's just taken on faith when you send your funds to an exchange like that. And so I think that that all of those hacks and all those things that went wrong in the past, and there haven't been that many lately, thankfully, but we'll see what happens if the market continues to kind of heat up. But that process of being the kind of concern trolling of like, if there's a big DeFi hack, it's going to set things back. I think most people in crypto are pretty insensitive to punishment. They're pretty they're not risk averse. They're pretty open to to taking losses, and that's why you're seeing these contracts get so much total value locked. I think it also goes back to the earlier point around people setting up position sizes that make sense, right? Like, we don't I certainly hope people aren't putting 100% of their available assets into some of these projects, but if you put 1%, that's not a bad trade necessarily, right? It might actually make sense. And 1% of everyone's value, right? Hopefully no one blows up. Some people will, because they go crazy and they YOLO in 100% of their assets. But, hopefully if you blow up, if one of these things blows up and, you lose 1% of your funds, I think that's ideally much better risk management than, you would have seen people in the past who had all of their money sitting on, Mt. Gox, or, all of their money sitting on one of these exchanges that blew up. So I think we need to just be a bit more measured about how we sort of look at that. But in terms of go to market, I think the space is hot right now. People are trying to get things out as quickly as they can. I mean, Stani and I are working on something, participating in something called Fair Launch Capital, where, the guys who are setting that up, kind of pinged a few of the DeFi founders to get us involved. And the idea was, to try and, slow some of this down, right? To try and, create a structure that would allow for audits even before raising money, et cetera. And I think it'll be a good test, right? It's a good sort of natural experiment. Like, if we can get some people to do this and slow down and get audits before they launch, great. I have a suspicion that it's not just money, right? It's not just money is not the limiting factor here. It's also time to market. People want to get things done. So, I think the end result of all of this is you really need to be very careful yourself with your own funds that you're deploying into any of these contracts, and make sure that you're sizing your trades effectively, and not putting half your assets or 100% of your assets into something like SUSHI or or YAM or whatever. It needs to be a measured approach.
Are the new people coming into crypto and participating in some of this stuff, or is it actually just the people that have been sitting on tokens that maybe are like holding them for a while, and they're just re-engaging back into start generating these yields and starting to have this crypto work kind of for them. So is the sector overall kind of expanding, or we just, kind of circling around with the same type of crowd? And, you're saying that, yeah, their experience, that went through a lot of journey there in crypto, but maybe if the new ones are coming in there, they don't know that side, right? So they can be affected. I think there was a lot of speculation that it's mostly the internal people that have been holding crypto for a while are re-engaging back in and working with this market. Stani, for you guys at Aave, you guys recently did get blessings from the FCA, which is, congratulations to you guys on that. That's huge. This can kind of onboard more users and people into the space and give on-ramps to people to get into crypto. Can you talk a little bit about that? What that FCA approval is giving you guys in terms of building out some of these on-ramps for the new people to get in?
Yeah, I mean, basically, like the Aave protocol itself is a decentralized protocol that will be governed by the Aave token holders, and it will run autonomously and so forth. So it's kind of the that is you could imagine something like being a pool of liquidity and as a kind of like an ocean. But what we realized that there isn't that many ways of actually plugging into this ocean from let's say a vessel or a port and so forth. And we were discussing with many kind of like gateways and trying to figure out like a solution, like how we could actually get more people involved into Aave and DeFi in general. And like one of the things, like the vertical approach has been always like something we try to achieve. Even our protocol is somewhat like a horizontal that you could build on top and build new products, but we also want to engage the end user. And that has been since the ages of ETHLand. So when people were building horizontally, so let's say, hey, here's my protocol, build your protocol on top of my protocol, and let someone else build their protocol on top of your protocol. And no one actually took the end user kind of like responsibility. And because we had some challenges like user experience and so forth, and the learning curve. And now things are way better. But since then, we always try to build directly to the user and kind of like expand that demographic. And what we noticed is that once these protocols are actually running autonomously, there needs to be ways that we can actually get more people involved. And I mean, actually depositing into Aave is quite simple. You just pretty much hold, you could even buy this so-called like A token, ASUSD, for example. You will generate yield on top of your SUSD. And that's an example. So you don't need to even deposit to Aave. And what's interesting here is that to actually get these tokens, you need to go to an exchange or like some other way. And we feel that there's a big gap in let's say population that is using fintech services and are very comfortable on opening payment accounts online without going into a old-fashioned banking branch, like because the traditional finance is left behind, but there's different levels of lagging. So some of them are like lagging way behind and more or less depending on how what kind of bank it is, and mainly because of their infrastructure or their policies and so forth. And we kind of see that there is this generation actually obtaining payments accounts, and they're very comfortable doing that. Now, what we were thinking is that what stops them actually to getting those fiat currencies into a form of cryptographic assets and using these decentralized services. And we want to basically connect that. Question is that how long we will keep up these services will probably, because it's an entity we have in UK, as a trial, we want to see how it goes, and whether it's going to be a so-called like supportive element on what we're doing, or we are going to just do it for a few years. And once there's enough adoption and enough gateways and things become cryptographic, and by cryptographic, I mean like fiat becomes even cryptographic. I mean, you can't fight this kind of technology in the form that is running now with the decentralized fashion. So I think it's just kind of like squeezing that gap a bit like together and making it a bit easier for larger audience to partake and see how it goes. I mean, it might be this is just a temporary trial, or it might be that this becomes something we are going to onboard millions of people. We don't know.
So just in general, like, what do you guys feel like the regulators are thinking about the DeFi space? And, Kain, for example, in AU, what do you see from the regulatory standpoint? How do they feel about DeFi? Do they even understand it at all? Or they're just kind of like waiting to see if this space can kind of self-regulate and hopefully nothing wrong happens, right? Because the regulators tend to get involved heavily once there's something bad happens. And if DeFi does have, something that bad happens in terms of unwinding and some of these contracts that blow up and a lot of money gets stolen, suddenly the regulators are like, okay, all right, we got to, step in and stuff. But so what's kind of the field there in AU as far as the regulations go for DeFi?
I think, crypto regulations in Australia have broadly been pretty good. There's definitely been some aspects that have been a little bit heavy-handed. There's also this weird thing that's been going on over the last couple of weeks with privacy coins, where they've been delisted from Australia. It still isn't 100% clear to me, and I haven't had a chance to follow up and find out what's going on, from some of the people who are more connected to that. But there's been some different approaches at different times, right? But I think broadly, in Australia, they've kind of taken a view that, innovation is not necessarily dangerous in itself, right? It's a question of, protecting, protecting people and ensuring that, you've got a sort of well-regulated market, really. And so I think that they've been, largely hands-off. We've been lucky. There've only been a couple of sort of scams or major like really egregious things in Australia, which has allowed them, I think, to take a very hands-off approach. I think if that changed and we had a bunch of people coming in, and even with the ICO boom, we were kind of lucky to avoid. There were a couple of examples that were quite bad, but I think the vast majority of token sales that were done out of Australia were done in the right way and attempted to kind of adhere to the spirit or the intent of the law. But I think that eventually, and I've said this before, we've now got the potential for several projects in Australia to have billions of dollars locked. So in AUD, right, we're over $1 billion. So at some point, some regulator is going to turn around and realize that they've got these $1 billion protocols in their backyard, and they haven't really necessarily dug too deeply into them. So I think that it will. There will be some scrutiny that kind of comes. But I also think that, a lot of the DeFi protocols, and I include Synthetix in this, have done a pretty good job of, over the last 2 years, decentralizing the protocol, and you're handing over control to the community. And obviously we've migrated to a DAO model where we've got 3 different DAOs. So, you do get to this point of sufficiently decentralized, to sort of paraphrase the SEC perspective from a few years ago. If something is sufficiently decentralized, it can't really be regulated, right? It's a set of smart contracts, it's a community. You can kind of round me up and chuck me in jail or something like that, but it's not going to stop Synthetix, right? Like Synthetix will keep going, So I think that there's definitely a bit of nuance in how regulators are going to have to approach these things. It's not, as easy as just turning up to the office of, centralized exchange X and saying, let us see your books. What are you doing? Right. It's much more complex than that.
Stani, is that kind of similar, as far as the framework goes for EU?
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty like a global consensus, but the kind of like a challenge is more about that there isn't that much of a regulation, what's basically DeFi is all about. I mean, there is enough opinions, let's say, from US, from the SEC about decentralization, and as Kay mentioned, if it's something is sufficiently decentralized, it's kind of like it's very challenging to regulate in that sense. I think more about like I think I constantly think more about the regulation and trying to like figure out actually not actually what might be the stance, but like how we could regulate this smart contract infrastructure that basically are running autonomously, and they will be running for as long as the network is upheld, which is in practice, if you have crypto economics involved, that particular network can run like infinite. So that's the difference between distributed and decentralized networks, is that these decentralized networks are incentivized to run, and that is the kind of like a interesting part of it. And if they're running autonomously all the time, like it's very difficult to, and we have like the networks are permissionless, so it means that you can access permissionlessly and you can build things permissionlessly. So it basically opens complete finance in a way that finance should be. Like you should be able to do transactions what you like and so forth. But of course, regulation is in place to stop different kinds of malicious acts, for example, and unwanted behavior. And that's the kind of like a draw part. But the way I'm thinking is that if you are able to sufficiently in decentralized manner to govern these protocols, that could be like the solution. It's kind of like a self-regulation, and there is examples of this kind of systems, but one thing like what this stuff reminds me is some sort of like a soft law regulation in industries where which are very highly like specific, you know, and it reminds me a bit similar, because once you can self-regulate yourself, whether it's like governance or like industry wise, there's less need for regulators to come in and actually enforce statutory law in that sense. So and what's interesting here in DeFi is that we kind of have a space where people can form a consensus what's right and wrong, and come up with this self-regulation, and we see it happen. I mean, there is actually, even though that people are launching without smart contract audits, there are guys who are actually launching with smart contract audits, formal verification, and so forth. If you look at Aave, Synthetix, and other projects, I mean, that are like heavily used, they are actually like putting all the efforts and participating also in the community-wise in the space. And I think if we are able to kind of like with this so-called self-regulation and teach people not to do like crazy things, then we're pretty fine. And I have to agree like with Kain about that why people are not doing audits. It's not even the money thing, because something like ERC20 smart contract, it doesn't cost that much to audit, but it's also kind of this idea of go to market quickly, and also the idea of like idea of doing it pretty wildly. And when you are anonymous, I mean, being anonymous is amazing. I mean, that's one of the rights that is like something that you can't take away from people. But one of the things is that you can also hide behind of this deployment if something goes wrong, so you don't carry the reputational risk that much. And I don't know, it's a bit sad part now, the couple of months that we have seen stuff, but also we have seen like a lot of improvement in the space as a consensus and so forth. And for example, me and Kain are doing a lot of work in actually like improving the space and have an opinion, and we're very vocal on pretty much in the space about kind of like best practices and so forth. And looking at the documentations we have, I mean, they speak for themselves. And I think we just need more projects that are in the same mindset as well as we are.
I wanted to ask you, since we're talking about this, you know, kind of leadership and then a public figure, right? It's interesting to see how projects and communities kind of seem like they need to have kind of that public figure, or even if it's a real person, or even if it's a fictional character, you know, at this point, you know, like a sushi chef, right? They kind of like to have that leader there. And then each time we get like an exit from some of these leaders, it becomes like kind of a FUD of itself, right? Well, for SUSHI case, it was because obviously he had, you know, a portion of SUSHI that he offloaded onto the market as soon as probably he could hedge on FTX. But that's already speculation. But, you know, so it seems like, you know, people are thinking, oh, okay, that's it. You know, now it's gone. Now SUSHI is decentralized because it doesn't have that one person that deployed the contract. You know, and then we had Sam that come in from FTX and pretty much like picked it up and saying, hey, listen, there, you know, we're gonna pick it up from here and basically save the SUSHI. But there's interesting stuff that's happening. I want to get your thoughts on this public figure, you know, kind of idea for the project, and then also specifically what's happening with SUSHI. Is it really, you know, getting decentralized?
So I think just to take a step back first and you know, look at what's actually happening in the space right now, and you know, the actual macro dynamics that are playing out. So, you know, we've got some irrational exuberance has kind of crept back into the market, right? Which is good. We're seeing experimentation. We're seeing, you know, things happening. But I think it's also, you know, as much as we should be concerned about that and trying to curtail it, we also need to look at, you know, how things have improved as well. If you go back to 2016, 2017 and the ICO boom, you know, you had projects that were launching with nothing, you know, and in some cases, no intent to ever deliver anything, right? Or what they intended to deliver was just utter nonsense, right? And people were throwing money at it, and this money was going into a black hole and never coming out, right? I've made this argument before that that's actually not even necessarily the worst thing, because out of that came a bunch of good projects. And you know, if you don't have overinvestment and you don't have any capital inefficiency or capital wastage, then you're underinvesting, right? That's just like, you can't, there's no perfect way to do it. You can't thread that needle, right? You either overinvest or you underinvest. And my view is I'd rather see, you know, overinvestment than underinvestment. And all of the scams and all of those things that happened were obviously, you know, not great. And you know, we definitely want to, you know, put structures in place to prevent that from happening. But I think seeing this, you know, DeFi wave kind of play out, we are seeing that. So the overinvestment that's happening now is people putting their assets into, you know, unaudited smart contracts. Those smart contracts do things. Now, maybe they don't do great things, but they actually do something. It's a thing that exists, that's on mainnet, that's, you know, ostensibly trying to achieve some purpose, some coordination game that's going on, right? And some of them are kind of Ponzi-like. Some of them are weird, you know, attempts to like siphon liquidity off from things. But I think it's a much, much better place that we're in right now. And so, you know, something like SUSHI, where, you know, we all put a bunch of funds into this smart contract, that was very clear what was going on, right? Like the dynamic there was not ambiguous, right? There was a single person who was siphoning off, you know, SUSHI out of every single transaction, essentially, into a pool that was totally at their discretion to use, right? And then they did. Now, okay, there's like some, you know, norm of like, oh, it's going to be used for the ecosystem or whatever, but, you know, it's an anonymous person that, you know, has total control and has, you know, no checks and balances on their power, right? It shouldn't be surprising to us that this happened in any way. Doesn't mean that it's a good thing, but, you know, it's definitely a thing, right? And I think we have to learn those lessons the hard way in some ways. And, you know, if someone were to launch a variant of SUSHI that had a similar dynamic going on, I hope that there would be some, you know, some tension before people just dumped funds into it. Again, I think, you know, certainly there would be probably some hesitation, a little bit more than last time. So I think, you know, we need to really look at the kind of macro crypto environment and what's happening and where investment's going and all of these different dynamics to understand, you know, the specific place of SUSHI in this dynamic and where we are in the cycle. But overall, you know, I think the efficiency of capital allocation over the last 12 months has been like orders of magnitude better than in 2016, 2017. You know, so much stuff was just like black holes that money never came out, right? So I really think that, you know, it's important to kind of contextualize what's going on and you know, where we are and the improvements that have been made, as well as, you know, as Stani said, trying to establish some norms and expectations and all of these things. So, you know, in terms of specifically SUSHI and like, is it more decentralized now? Is it re-centralized? I think for me, the biggest question is now not, because initially it was like, okay, can you create this like parasitic liquidity siphon, right? That can come in and just like, hook into this pool and siphon liquidity over to another pool on Ethereum. Now it's actually an even crazier question, which is, can you create this liquidity siphon that can siphon liquidity off Ethereum altogether onto Solana and this other smart contract platform? If that works, and I suspect that it may not, and I'll put my hand up to say that the liquidity that I've got in SUSHI right now will not cross the chasm off Ethereum. I will personally be pulling my liquidity before that happens, once the time lock announcement goes live. So whatever that signal is worth, like, I'm putting that out there. That's my plan. And so I don't think that it's going to be effective, but if it does, it's a huge game-changing event in the overall crypto ecosystem. This idea that you can leverage these coordination games to pull liquidity, not just from one contract to another in Ethereum, but actually off Ethereum completely. If that is effective, that's a game-changing moment, and it's going to be really interesting to watch play out.
You guys experienced some also like times when you had exploits, right, back in the day, that that has been fixed, obviously. Was there any type of issues in terms of people attacking the liquidity on Synthetix, or is that even possible? Back in the day,
we haven't seen it yet.
Okay.
We haven't seen it yet. We've seen people fork. There was a Tron fork called Oikos. I think there's maybe even a Binance chain fork called Spartan Protocol. Which I'm not a huge fan of the meme co-option, but anyway, I don't care if you take the code, but
they even fork memes.
Yeah, I know. Don't fork on memes. That's a line that you should not cross. So I think that's we've seen that happening where they've tried to take the entire code base wholesale and migrate it to another platform. We haven't yet seen, and I'm surprised that we haven't, and I kind of am expecting this at any point. We haven't yet seen an attempt to kind of relaunch Synthetix with like some different distribution. And again, like there's a part of me that's like, don't even tempt fate by talking about it. But I think it's bound to happen at some point. I think almost every single protocol that believes it has a liquidity moat is going to find that thesis tested pretty aggressively by the market. And so we just need to be prepared for it and prepared to weather it. And I think our community is strong enough that we'd probably be able to kind of fend off that attempt. But you never know. You never know. Crypto is very adversarial.
No, absolutely, yeah, and your community is, is quite strong. So that's for sure. The last time we spoke, you mentioned the spoof volume and kind of the gaming of liquidity that's been happening, and so on. And we also kind of talked about like the stickiness of the liquidity, right? Because oftentimes like these platforms are coming out, the huge APR, right? And then next thing you know, it's actually being transferred by the robo-advisor, and liquidity shifts, quickly from platform to platform to capture that APR and so on that it's been offered. How do you, retain that liquidity? Because, you guys actually done a fantastic job in that side of things, where you do end up retaining, a lot of the liquidity and battle that, the outflow of liquidity to maybe elsewhere. But this hop continues to happen in the industry where this liquidity continues to hop, and a lot of projects are struggling. So how do you guys do? How do you guys retain the liquidity in these, on your platform rather than maybe outside, putting it outside, to chase APR?
I think we have seen this happen where SNX has definitely been deployed into things like SUSHI, and we've seen SNX get sucked out into that, and into a couple of other things as well, YAM, I think, etc. It wasn't a meaningful amount. It was like low single digits of the SNX supply got sucked out into some of these protocols to farm these things, and in most cases, I think. If you look at the on-chain analysis, it was small percentages of holdings of various large SNX holders that were participating in these things. It wasn't like wholesale movement of tokens. But I think the crazy thing that Synthetix did, and the thing that we probably got a lot of criticism for, and still do get criticism for, was we rolled our own collateral, right? We said we're not going to use ETH, we're not going to use stable coins, we're not going to use real estate or whatever. We're going to actually, bootstrap our own collateral. And I think that is much, much harder to replicate, because the opportunity cost of SNX as collateral, is not nearly as high as, something like USDC, right? So like retaining USDC in your platform is fucking hard, right? There's a million different things you can do, and ETH as well, right? Like, like a tiny APY increase on ETH yield, right? And now you've got things like, the wire and ETH vaults where it doesn't care, right? Like to your point, it's a robot, right? Like it's just, laser focused on like whatever the best opportunity is, and bang, it's in there, right? So I think that that maintaining collateral in your contracts that is super fluid in terms of where it can go is really hard. But SNX, being this kind of bootstrap collateral that's intrinsic to the network, maybe we got a bit lucky there in kind of deciding to go down that path, which again, we got a lot of criticism for, but I think it is maybe a little bit more defensible than trying to maintain ETH or USDC or whatever in your smart contracts.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was actually very skeptical on our first interview when you did talk to me about that. But glad to see all that success that's coming through for you guys. Stani, so let's hop into a little bit about the flash loans that you guys are working with. That product itself has been actually shown tremendous success. And I was, skeptical as well when we had our interview, by kind of the flash loans and how it was working and so on, what was the market fit for it and so on. But you guys have been, performing really well in that sector. Can you, tell me what was the kind of part of the success in the flash loan side of things on your platform?
Yeah, I mean, when we launched in January, there wasn't many flash loans. I mean, it was just pretty much like test transactions, and we took a lot of effort to actually like promote the flash loan in different hackathons and just with our community members and everyone. We just knew that there's this opportunity, and you can actually build some cool stuff, and people were actually asking like, well, what kind of stuff you could build. And so we did a blog post where we showed like a not even dozen, but maybe like 6-8 different examples what you could do besides arbitrage, such as like refinancing, debt swap, and closing positions of your loan positions and so forth. For example, in MakerDAO, and like we didn't see that much traction in the beginning, but the market was improving. And once the COVID started to hit, and it took a hit in the Wall Street and took a hit in the crypto street, what actually happened is that the Black Thursday came, and we saw like this very like a sharp needle going up with the utilization of flash loans, and I was thinking it's kind of like a mistake or something, and I was thinking like who is like utilizing all these flash loans, and they were like liquidations, like pre-liquidations in the MakerDAO system. So there's a project called DeFi Saver, which allows you to self-liquidate yourself without returning the loan, so that you don't lose your kind of like a collateral, the small chunk that the liquidators are getting as a reward. You don't lose that. And actually during that day, I think DeFi Saver saved a few million worth of wallets just by this implementing this flash loan feature. Otherwise, they would have to had that liquidity on spot, so they would be limited. Now they basically had the unlimited liquidity to actually do this operations, and that was pretty cool, because that meant that Maker had way less. They needed way less funds to compensate the buck they had in the Fed liquidation. So
that worked out pretty well.
but I think it helped a bit of like people realizing, and also like when the awareness came more, like people started to use flash loans, and I mean it's just part of the like Aave narrative. I mean, flash loan has been always in the Ethereum ecosystem because of the atomicity. I've seen multiple implementations way long back ago, and we just popularize it in some interesting way. And I think that's how it went. And I wanted to actually touch a base about the Kain's point about using SNX as a collateral. Like that was a quite brave move, and it was actually interesting because like you really have a network token that you're using, so it's really difficult to abstract the liquidity there, and that is something I think even though like we understand in the space that this kind of like liquidity attacks may come, and they will come as if there's incentives and people run with the liquidity. But I'm always on the stance that liquidity comes different shapes and forms. So you could have that fast food liquidity that comes and farms and dumps and leaves, or you could have like liquidity that might basically want to farm because they want to get your token, go long on it. Sad part is that 90% of the farmers that are farming with the big accounts, they're pretty much dumping the what they farm. But there are nice models where that isn't happening, and yields, like even like having too high yields, that will attract people who want to quickly get the yields and so forth. So yeah, I mean, liquidity is some kind of like a network effect, and it's becoming crazier, especially like Kain mentioned like the attack on Ethereum, like as what's happening now. That is pretty funky.
On the flash loans for a second, I was thinking as Stani was talking, how I yearn for the quaint days where we were worried that flash loans were going to be the end of DeFi, right? And how naive that view was, right? Like we're all like in Jan Feb, like, oh, flash loans are going to ruin everything, and it's like it's now just hilarious to think that we were all so afraid of flash loans when there were way worse creatures lurking under the floorboards, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And like I mentioned, when I first talked to you about it, I was skeptical about it as well, and I was like, oh no, but things are going in the right way. Kain, you guys, I read your primer for the perp that you guys are launching, right? And it's fantastic. It's very interesting to see how you guys balance out in terms of the function of a funding, right? So the books don't get too skewed there. And it's an interesting dynamic there. The questions that I kind of came up to for me as I was reading it is when it comes to the liquidity, right, that SNX the pool provides. You have also the liquidators, right, that are incentivized to liquidate the positions as quickly as possible. So this way, it basically doesn't cost them for liquidating later and recovering that collateral. But given the situation that we're in, with Ethereum and congestion in networks, and volatility picks up, the fees go higher, and all that jazz that can happen. Do you think like there's a risk in getting those liquidators stuck in trying to liquidate those positions, which essentially will can risk the pool that is against that's set up there to provide liquidity?
Absolutely. And, I think your threat model needs to be constantly updated, right? And, I think flash loans definitely did that. Back in the day, I remember, we used to all talk about like, oh, okay, what if someone has, 20,000 ETH, right? What can they do to your smart contract, right? Like what if they have 5,000 ETH, right? But it wasn't, your threat model kind of capped out at about that, right? Like maybe 10,000, 15,000, 20,000 ETH, right? There was no threat model of what happens if someone has 250,000 ETH. That just wasn't a thing, right? And then flash loans came along and we were like, oh, maybe we need to like up our threat model by like an order of magnitude, right? Thanks, Stani. Thanks, I appreciate it. And so, all of a sudden there were things that could go wrong in a very different way that just was not sort of contemplated, right? And so I think, a similar thing happened when gas prices went, up to 100 gwei. We'd previously, I think Maker had issues with this, Chainlink had issues with this, we had seen some crazy stuff in the past. So I think our cap was like 200 gwei or something like that, right? I'm sure, I think Stani had issues, with this as well. We all were like, oh, 200 gwei, like that's our extreme edge of like how crazy you get, right? And now you need to update to like 1,000 Gwei. I don't know. I mean, what do you think, Stani? What's the upper limit now?
What's the stress test?
I think 1,000 is might come. I mean, it just requires a bit more people that there is now, and other like spikes on incentives and I think we're in 1,000. Hopefully. Yeah, because for us, it's kind of like it's also like a bit like it's another funny thing because we have like the user experience is like this: like someone deposits with smaller amounts, gets interest, and then wants to withdraw or so forth. And he was like looking at the gas, like what the hell? I'm paying like twice as I earned. Like what is this like? And these guys and girls are like going out and out of the DeFi and thinking like, well, that was an experience. Like what that wasn't like. It's kind of like, but I think over the time, I think there are solutions for this.
For sure, and so I think we just have to adjust, right? But interestingly, even before we get to the perp liquidations, we've got liquidations within Synthetix now, right? Like synthetic SNX positions can get liquidated, and there was a conversation in our Discord where people were doing some back of the envelope math around what the incentive was, etc. And one thing that wasn't really factored into the model was that the penalty that's paid, right, is essentially paid in the form of SUSD, right? Like it costs you less to liquidate when you send SUSD to liquidate the position, right? So you get back more SNX than you actually paid in SUSD. What's interesting though is that when SUSD was trading above the peg, due to all these yield farming things, it actually eats into the incentive, right? And so people were doing an analysis of like at 108 and 500 Gwei, and you like this is this multi-dimensional thing. You can't look at it as like a sort of a single sort of number, right? You need to look at the entire conditions. And so there were some concerns about like, will liquidations actually happen if it gets up to these particular things, which were kind of outside the bounds of where we were expecting things to be, right? The idea that SUSD could be trading at 108 while Gwei was 500, while the market was crashing 30%. I mean, there's people like Gauntlet out there that can do these very deep analyses of all these different conditions, and it's something that we're looking into. But you need to constantly be adjusting your model of like how crazy can the world get, right? Because whatever you think it is, it could be an order of magnitude beyond that. So
yeah, absolutely. I'm glad you guys are doing that stress testing and planning ahead, because there are a lot of players in the industry that are not doing that, and eventually when the bad times come, they're the ones who are actually suffering. So yeah, I'm glad you guys are doing those things. So in terms of the perp, swap, is that when is that going live? When can we expect that going forward? Because you mentioned that you're gonna start with, what is it, 25x leverage, right, from the beginning, and then
maybe 5x, I think.
Oh,
maybe
okay.
5x to start off. We could. So the challenge is latency as well, right? Like Oracle latency. And so when we're on L1, Oracle latency is still a bit of an issue, and so we need to kind of we're going to start with an incentivized testnet. That's the first process, and we want to see what the edges are and kind of shake it out a little bit. So hopefully that will be sometime this month. Although given the kind of market conditions now and issues with the SUSD peg, we've kind of shifted some of the priorities around to push some other stuff out. So I think we'll have SUSD lending online even maybe before we go live on the testnet with futures, because it's probably the most powerful lever that we have to kind of increase the SUSD supply to address these supply shortages that we've got. We're kind of in the Maker situation that Maker was dealing with, has been dealing with now for quite a while, where there's a lot of demand for decentralized stablecoins. So we've kind of as a community agreed we're not going to go down the centralized collateral path as a way of kind of unlocking additional liquidity. So we need to tap into ETH and maybe some of the BTC variants that are available to kind of expand the supply.
A community member that asked a question about SUSD and how the premium is affected by the gas fees and network congestion. So thank you for explaining that. Have you seen the arbitrage guys come in and start arbing SUSD during the times when that happens? And is there like an example that you've seen where SUSD premium gets arbed out and maybe that kind of smooths it out?
It's hard at the moment because you've got this interesting dynamic where most of the liquidity is in curve, and with the curve rewards that are playing out and the current gauge weights, there is an incentive to keep a decent chunk of USDC and USDT in that pool. And so what's quite interesting is that the DAI SUSD peg is actually really tight. It performs really well, right? Because both of them have a similar issue of lack of supply. But there's I think someone in Discord said this last night, right? There's an almost infinite amount of fiat money out there, right? And when USDC is only constrained by how quickly you can delve fiat into a bank, it is hard to kind of compete with that, in these incentive games. And so we're looking at different ways of mitigating that and trying to reduce those issues. But, unfortunately, increasing the supply and letting people kind of arb it out, and sell down into the market to increase supply is really the only sort of efficient way of doing that. And, we've pulled some levers internally to try and reduce the collateralization ratio, but there's a point where like you start hitting risk levels that are not comfortable, and I think the community has kind of hit that level, at 600% collateralization ratio. So it's a continual process to try and optimize this for sure.
Do you ever have an idea on when you're thinking it could be launched, just theoretically?
The SUSD borrowing.
SUSD borrowing.
Or futures.
Futures,
both of them are pretty close.
Okay.
We've got 4 or 5 different things that different teams are kind of working on at the moment. And I think we'll have a number of things, including something that Stani was alluding to, around L2 and optimism, in the next more like weeks than months, right? So there's a bunch of different things. We're just trying to juggle them all and just deal with what the highest priority is at the time, which sometimes shifts day to day depending on which thing's on fire.
No, absolutely. So this has been a fantastic interview, and I know it's kind of late for Stani there, but to kind of wrap things up, Stani, I can't not bring this up. The interesting stuff that's happening with Aave in terms of Aavegotchi, right? So this is something that we're talking about, DeFi and NFT. Are you guys are trying to bridge the gap there, or what's going on there? Tell me a little bit more about it.
Yeah, Aavegotchi is kind of like a project done in the Aave ecosystem, in the way that they're basically using you can basically buy this portal, and portal is kind of like a card deck, and each portal has a number of Aavegotchis. And Aavegotchis are this randomly generated NFT collectibles, and they have different kinds of traits and rarities. So it has this kind of like rarity farming mechanism there. And what's interesting is that once you have those Aavegotchis, to actually unlock them and start using in the Aavegotchi ecosystem, is basically by certain actions. Those actions is earning yield on Aave. In the future, there might be any kind of action. But the idea is that the Aavegotchi crew or fam, or how they're going by name, is that they're incentivizing for a certain kind of behavior, and their first experimentation is basically to teach people to save funds in the form of NFTs. And I personally like the project because once you unlock the collectibles, you can actually go deeper into a composability level where you could create interesting games with the Aavegotchis, and they have also this function of course they have like traits in the sense and properties that some of them are unlocked quicker, and because of the the way you unlock, and depending on what asset you use. For example, you might be saving on SUSD, for example, is you could be depositing even SNX, Land, Link, and so forth. And there's different kinds of properties involved. But they have also variables, like you can buy or get rewards on different kinds of things, and that really opens the doors for brands as well in the future. And if it gets so attention in that sense. But really interesting project, to be honest. Like I haven't seen for a while kind of like a people putting so much effort as they are doing. Like this is like a team of I think there's 3 or 4 developers, and they're putting quite a lot of effort what they're doing, and they're using this diamond standard of upgradability on Ethereum, and like they're putting so much effort. It's just like so I mean, just for the effort, I would like to see what's going to happen. And they're doing actually this kind of like a DICO, which is a something after the post ICO era. Vitalik proposed a new model, kind of doing fundraising without by giving up the control right away for the governance. And it's basically a mixture of DAO and so the old-fashioned ICO, in a way that the governance controls the whole the funds, and then they have this kind of like a tap that they can open up the funds on for developers where they're building stuff. And I think now it's even more interesting, because like back in the days when we were raising funds, for example, at Aave Elite Land and Kain's team, is that you had a certain type of a roadmap, and if you deviated in the slightest, your community will get completely confused. But that's not the idea of the governance, like that you have the roadmap, and even if middle of the roadmap you figure out that okay, the first 6 steps were good, and the next 6 doesn't anymore make sense, and they still want you to deliver because of they might not be on the same page of the strategy. And what's interesting about this DICO is that the governance can actually decide, okay, actually maybe this other thing should be built, or and interesting to see if this model will work out. But people are too scared to use it, and these guys seem to be brave enough to try it out.
I know a lot of NFT guys and collectors, they're kind of, very new to this, and even, kind of doing things on the platforms like Wax and so on, right? They're still kind of new to it. And then kind of adding the DeFi element to it also has, pretty big kind of learning curve to figure out, all right, what is the game here, right? And then I love the fact of like, the DAOs being able to delegate, in terms of, all right, which projects we get to fund next. So, that's always a good experiment, even though, we've seen something maybe similar in the past, but we really haven't seen something that really kind of boomed, right? And yep. Kind of, was effective. Governance is like a whole different subject of itself. We can have, a different episode about it, to be honest. But, it is exciting to see that, the Aavegotchi, what they're doing, and, how different it is in terms of like bridging maybe that gap between the NFT guys and DeFi guys, and so they can play together in this. So that's absolutely fantastic. All right. So as we're kind of wrapping this up, and Kain, I can't let you go without answering this, because, we've talked about this kind of issue in terms of, going back into trading, in terms of, all right, you have liquidity providers locking their liquidity in the pools, and then, again, network congestion happens, whatnot, right? And then they can't really pull out the liquidity because of the network congestion, so they're kind of stuck there. That's one scenario. And the second scenario, if there's no network congestion, then basically liquidity providers can remove liquidity like this instantly, which, they don't really have any penalty for it, right? There's no penalties for removing liquidity quickly. There's no lockup periods for the liquidity, mainly, to stay there. So, do you think that can kind of present a scenario where that can be kind of, a bad practice if, certain things hit, let's say, and suddenly a lot of liquidity providers dip out and market makers are not there anymore, and cause a bunch of gaps? Have we made any like strive in that sector to prevent maybe from something like this happening, to keep the liquidity maybe, besides the fact that, network congestion, if it happens, then they're kind of stuck there not by choice, So,
I think a lot of people who provide liquidity are fairly passive, right? That's kind of the selling point, right? If you're a liquidity provider on, Curve or Uniswap or whatever, yes, they're professional, LPs that jump around between different pools, whatever the highest yield is. But the original value prop was just dump your funds in here and walk away and come back, and you'll have made 1 or 2%, just from putting your value to work. And I think there's still people who are not interested in actively yield farming. It's a tough gig. It's not an easy thing to do. You really need to be on top of your game if you're going to try and optimize for yield farming. And if you're just holding some USDC or DAI or whatever, and just want to put it into something that is fairly battle hardened, like Aave or whatever, and let it be borrowed and deployed by yield farmers, great. And I mean, we've seen that with SUSD. The SUSD APY has jumped up to 10, 20, I don't know what the average is, but it wouldn't surprise me if over the last month it's been over 20%, right? So you can kind of passively put your value into Aave and let other people do the crazy stuff, right? And then the risk is on them. So I do think that there are passive participants in this that just want an easy path, and a low risk path. And I think there are active participants who want high risk, high yield, and are trying to optimize for that. So different strategies for different people in the ecosystem.
Gotcha. Yeah, definitely different segments for each participant there. So I appreciate that. So yeah, looks like, we made our way towards the end of the episode. So guys, again, Kain, Stani, I really appreciate you guys stopping by the channel. This, picking your brain is something, I love doing. You obviously can see that, the smile on my face. Good luck with all your endeavors that you guys are doing. You guys are killing it. And you really, providing, like you mentioned, guidance to the community and being upfront with everything in terms of what you guys think of the industry and building with the communities in terms of how the industry should be. And that's absolutely fantastic. So good luck on all of your projects and endeavors. And, obviously we'll have you guys back soon on our channel once, maybe about 6 months or so to recap and see how things are going. What do you guys see? Because honestly, things change so quickly in this space. It's like ridiculous. Might as well have you like every week on our channel. But yeah, I really appreciate you guys stopping by.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you. It was good fun.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, it's super amazing, and it's super cool be here with also with Kain, and thanks for making some time for us. And yeah, I mean, I'm going to sleep.
This is the only time Stani and I get to hang out. Is on some shows. So it's it's good fun to get a chance.
There's like a 1 hour of time to do business together with Kain. So
exactly. Yeah.
You got an hour and a half.
Hey guys, we hope you enjoyed today's episode. Make sure to check out Layer 1 on all the audio and video platforms listed in the description. Thanks for stopping by, and we'll see you next week.